welcome to the second installment. And the fact that I had gone for 2 hours of that first installment is a big explanation of why this is A, taking so long, and B, disheartening me. I think I went into a lot of detail in the initial abstract, and probably enough to give you the idea of the game, and now I'm like digging into the rules in close to full detail. Anyway, I hope the first part is useful to people because the rest of this probably less so. Alright, for rail movement. So anything except frontiers are allowed to use rail movement. You start an activation in a rail hex and you can basically go, I believe, as far as you like, as long as you're following contiguous friendly controlled rail hexes, which can even be into a besieged enemy fortress, but not through it, because unless, I don't know, maybe, I doubt the bypass even allows you to do that, because the rail bypass is intended just for supplies. You're not going to be moving large forces of troops through there. Of course, there's no restriction on using the routes that the ammo supplies are going through, which, for the siege guns, which, okay, whatever. You can go to or from an off-map box, but you can't go through one. I don't know, I guess, I mean, I don't know why you'd terribly need this, but I guess if the French were cut here, you'd want to drop into the off-map box and maybe come out this way. Well, you can't. Okay. We've got some discussion of the rail nets and the hex control again. And again, like I say, there's a bit of bloat to these rules. There's probably some overlap in here. Yeah, once you have the rail net, it's considered friendly controlled until an enemy unit occupies it. Now, unless you're playing with the sort of enhanced control where you can grab control of hexes without grabbing the whole rail net. Well, you can hold control of the hex without holding the rail net. And I may play with that, I'm not sure. Then you kind of have to block the rail net by sitting on it. Okay, rail movement capacity. We have a capacity of the number of strength points that can move each turn. Now you have a base number of strength points that you can move, and then a maximum. And if you go above the base, you start paying a victory point penalty. Every 4 SPs costs 1 victory point for either side. It's just the direction is why they have a different. A lot of examples in here. Okay, sea transport. So only the French player can use sea transport. Now, strangely, there's some things that seem to imply the Germans could, but no, there's nothing actually in here. And sea transport allows you to go between friendly control ports. It also is going to allow you to use the invasion box. You're going to need to use that. French player is going to have up to 6 strength points each game turn that they can sea transport. They don't get any penalty for overusing it. Pontoon bridges. You sit next to the river. It's got to be a major river. And gee, do we have differences? So major river. Do we have a minor river? We have minor rivers. Major river looks a little darker, maybe. I'm trying to look here, and I don't necessarily see it, but yeah, I think it's a little darker, a little thicker. It looks like there's not a lot in the way of major rivers, though. I would say the Rhine is, and some of its tributaries, but I don't see like the Loire or anything like that being major. Which is fair enough. Oh, we got a major coming out of here, too. Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty clear. Okay. what do we got? So the pontoon bridge can be placed, and you have to have, you know, a unit next to it of various types. And then that's going to allow you to cross the major river, and it'll have a cost of 2 movement points, even if there's not a bridge. For the rail lines all have bridges with them, obviously, and everywhere where there is a bridge that's not a rail line, there's a rail line there, is the assumption. How true is it? Well, there are probably some smaller bridges in some places, but, you know, whatever. Because I think the rail net is not that developed compared to, say, some of the older bridges, but we don't know for sure. Okay. The actual reaction movement. Well, we haven't gone over this very well. If something moves it into, spends movement points inside your ZOI, you're allowed to make a reaction check, and you use the leader's reaction rating, which is always in the middle left of the counter. At least they spell it out here. So it's this number, and which way does it go? SPs without a leader have a 6. Cav divisions and Francture have lower values, so I'm guessing you want to roll equal to or higher. And it's on a single die. Are there any modifiers? Probably. I don't see any. Okay. Armies with attached core and cav divisions have an increased flexibility. Divisions and lone strength points do not ever get this. If you're triggering a reaction within the zone of influence of the army, the attacking player can choose whether the attached core or cav division that are in the army's ZOI can roll for reaction on their own, or they use a single roll for all the formations in that army. The controlling player then can form them up into multiple groups and roll on them separately. Okay, if you create groups, you must use the army leader's reaction rating. But if you're trying to react with an individual formation, you can ignore that. Multiple strength points in the same hex can react in a combination. And so you can either roll individually or as groups. You roll the die, you modify it. See reaction table and 12.41, so we should get the reactions. Let's see if we can find the reaction table somewhere in here. Here's the reaction modifiers. So it's based on the terrain. Now, terrain is a weird thing here. Okay. The core terrain of the hex being that's triggering it can give you a modifier. That's a modifier to the die roll. So, for example, moving into a forest hex gives a -1 reaction to the die roll. Now, what is the bracket? The bracket's for the Franctures, which get to reverse the modifier because they're sneaky. So actually the terrain is hiding them, their movements, which probably are away, from the moving player. But they don't have to be away. Okay, and then you roll on, there's a reaction attempt result, and if you get less than the modified rating, you get nothing. If you get equal to or 1 higher, you get 1 hex of reaction. 2 or more higher, you get 2 reaction hexes. However, those are not straight up hexes. And you got to keep track that reaction modifiers don't go across major rivers. Well, why is that there? It only applies if the enemy unit is entering the hex of the units attempting to react, i.e. they're basically probably crossing the river to generate that. Okay. Cav reconnaissance, if you're within a ZOI of a friendly Cav division, and that is within the ZOI of the unit attempting reaction, you get a bonus to the die roll, which is here. The distance can give a penalty. The reacting unit being demoralized can give a penalty. Now, I'm trying to look. Reaction move allowance. Okay. You cannot enter any hex which was used by the enemy units to enter the reacting unit's hex. There's a minimum move prohibited, which means we'll get to that in a moment. The costs is what I'm looking for here. So the minimum move prohibited means if you're moving into a hex that costs you 2 hexes of movement, you need to get 2 hexes of movement off the table to get it. I'm trying to see where that is, though. It's under reaction movement. Okay. So you get 1 or 2 hexes, and you may not enter a hex. Yeah. You can overrun during it. Overruns are like 12 to 1. We haven't hit combat yet. Any hex that would cost more than 1 movement point to enter during regular movement is going to take 2 hexes of reaction to enter. And again, you don't get the minimum move here. If multiple units react separately, you roll their reactions separately and move them all before any... Each reaction roll and movement must be completed before the next roll is made. If multiple units react together on a single roll, they can use they must use coordinated movement, the pulsing. Okay, Cav divisions, if they get a reaction on a unit entering their hex, they can do something special called Cav interdiction, which costs the enemy movement points. Unfortunately, that also leaves the Cav lying there where it'll probably get killed. Even if it fails its reaction roll, it's always allowed to do a retreat reaction when somebody tries to enter its hex. It can run away from anything. This could generate multiple combats. There's an ordering for the combat. Really kind of special rules you'd have to look up anyway if that happened. Some leaders have special reaction ratings. Remember the question marks, exclamation points that might cause their reactions to follow a pattern. Can we do combat? Am I awake enough? All right, let's go over combat. Okay, so combat happens when units are sharing the same hex as their enemy and not in a besiegement situation. Demoralized units will not be allowed to initiate combat. I'm not sure about that because there are some situations where a demoralized unit could cause a reaction. I know they can't move into a reaction hex, but I'm not absolutely positive. There may be a conflict there in the rules. If multiple combats occur in the same movement or reaction, the order of the resolution is decided by the player moving the units. For combat that occurs during movement and not reaction, the player controlling the activated side is going to be the attacker. The other player is the defender, but on reaction, the movement of the reacting player determines who's going to be the attacker. Okay. So yes, the reacting player would be the attacker in the case of a demoralized force being reacted against in the situation I was talking about. So it isn't a problem. Okay, so in the combat sequence, and you do have this spelled out on one of these somewhere. Now it's always in the last place I look. Yeah, but it's actually on the last card. I've looked at every other card. Okay, it's actually spelled out here as well. The first thing you do is you determine whether or not the attacker has an overrun, 12 to 1 or greater, in which case you simply skip and see if the loser loses any casualties and then continue on for the impact and such not. If there's not going to be an overrun, you determine whether or not there's any immediate victory point penalties for the heads of state if this is a battle involving the largest army on the board. And yeah, you're going to have to count up all the factors in all the armies every time there's a battle. And you're not certain where the largest army is. Nice, huh? Yeah. Anyway, you'd get the assessment against you there. The two players determine the artillery strength of their force. Okay. Let's start paging through these things again. This is reminding me of Elusive Victory. There's a certain degree of, yeah, at least I'm a little more interested in the topic here, but man, when you start paging through too many charts in a game, you're starting to lose my interest, at least at this age. We'll see if I have to page through them during play. If I do not have to page through them all the time and search for things. Okay, we didn't find it that pass, but I know it's here. Here it is. All right, so the artillery factors are just spelled out by each type. So like the Army gives you 2, each Corps gives you 3, each strength point gives you some amount of artillery. You get that total together, you compare it to the artillery strength. There are some modifiers here to the die rolls based on terrain and who it is, and you roll some dice, and you get results. The results are spelled out, and each player does this. The results are spelled out as 3 possible things. First, there's a plus modifier. That is a modifier in your favor on your combat results die roll. You will do more. You'll have more of an impact in the actual, firing and melee. The second result is just a number of strength points that you're damaging. If there's a half, you have a 50-50 chance of that strength point, of that extra strength point taking an effect. That's always a clunky design to me. And then a D is a demoralization effect, but it doesn't take effect immediately. It's going to be withheld until the end of the combat. Now you have to note these down somewhere, and there's no little play aids for this, so, You might be able to do it just by using strength point markers and such not, until the end of the combat, because you'll need to be able to sum up the different combats. Then you go to calculate combat odds, and you're going to determine the odds or ratio difference between the strength points and units. Now, got to be careful here, because not all units count in combat. In particular, cavalry strength points don't count towards your odds, if I recall correctly. So you add it up, you take the odds. Now, there's some miswording here. And when you get to the combat odds actual spelling out of the table, basically the way it's worded, the only way you get 1 to 2 is if you precisely have 1 to 2. Because if you have less than 1 to 2 odds, you'll be on the 1 to 3 chart. And if you have anything more than 1 to 2 odds, you end up on the differential. And it's just, somebody wasn't paying enough attention when they wrote the rules and our proofread them, as far as I can tell. We could look at it, but let's see. Yeah. Okay. Initial odds of less than 1 to 3 are prohibited. Initial odds of 1 to 3 to 1 to 2 are resolved on the 1 to 3 or 1 to 2 column as appropriate. Initial odds of greater than 1 to 2 but less than 2 to 1 will go on the differential. Well, if you are less than 1 to 2, you will be rounded down, because somewhere or another, otherwise round any fractions in favor of the defender. So you would end up only on the 1 to 2 table if you precisely hit it. That is not what I think is intended. But the problem here is, what do you do, right? Well, if I get a 2 to 1 odds, see, yeah, if you don't do that, you don't get on this chart unless you're at least 1 to 1 odds. So that's problematic. So, I mean, it's the only way you can do it, the way they've worded the odds chart. And to tell you the truth, the original game may have had this problem as well. I don't remember for sure. Anyway, I guess I have to go with the rules as written. I can't think of a way to change that easily. So, if you get outside of the 2 to 1 boundaries, if you get into the main parts of the chart, you're going to start worrying about the odds ratios. But if you're within the range between 1 to 2 and 2 to 1, then you end up hitting a differential chart. And whoever has the most strength points, well, you subtract the defender's strength points from the attacker, and you get a number on here. And of course, these can be at the edges. This column is still important because you could conceivably shift to it. Okay. Now, we've already kind of talked about the combat chart before, but where are we? Why are we on this reaction stuff here? Okay. Then you determine if either side is going to get cav superiority die roll modifier. Now, this is funky. This isn't something that you can directly look at. Let's see where I can find it. Cav superiority. Each player rolls a die 6 and adds the number of cav they have. If one person gets a higher total die roll, they're going to get a +1 die roll modifier in the combat for cav superiority. They're also going to have another possible advantage, which they can choose to take, which gives them a column shift for cav superiority. But that means that they'll take every other loss on cavalry. Using your cav in battle is dangerous in this, but it can be effective, unlike in the American Civil War. Like, it's dangerous in the sense that you lose more valuable units, presumably. Okay. I think I already mentioned, after the artillery fire, you make another check for a possible overrun. But that can only affect if the attacker has the 12 to 1. I don't know how likely the defender getting it would be, but whatever. If the defender gets more than 3 to 1, they win. So, okay. Because the attack has no effect on the defender in that case. Okay, you've got modifiers for terrain demoralization and forces attached to the different armies. Those are going to be spelled out here. You have to look up the terrain effects chart to see what happens. One hex side terrain is chosen. Now this is kind of weird too. So if any of the attacking units came through non-clear hex sides, one of those non-clear hex sides of the attacker's choice is applied. But if they all came through clear, they're not going to get any penalty, obviously. And if they all went through 1, they'll get that penalty, obviously. But what this means is, if I attack you across a stream and over the open, I'm not providing any cover whatsoever for the guys crossing the stream. But if I attack you through worse things, and I'm not sure what could be much worse, because I don't think I can attack across a major river. Let's see what kind of... It could be there's just no problem here, and that I'm making up a problem because of the way the rules are worded, but I don't think so. So here's the terrain effects chart, and what do we have for hex sides? So yeah, a major river hex side gives 2 shifts to the left, a minor river hex side gives 1 shift to the left. I could be attacking you across a major and a minor river, and I would only get the 1 shift penalty if I choose, which of course I would. And then, you know, it's like somehow I'm drawing you off of that defensive line that I couldn't draw you off of if I was attacking you from the clear. It just boggles my mind. It's one of those, well, why do this way? Just charge them for the most or something. I don't know, but not that. Because it really starts stressing me out when I start seeing things that, like, I cannot explain a why for. It's just like, wow. The why is, I guess, it was just too heavy a loss. But why am I, you know, that doesn't make sense. Like, if I was an attacker and I was sending forces at you, and some of my forces have to cross a minor river or a major river, and I just know that, am I going to choose to also cross the minor river? Does that provide any benefit, or can I just attack you from the clear? And I can see very little reason for justifying the way it's done. What it ends up doing is directing your movements in ways that aren't necessarily realistic, and it disturbs me. Okay. So, the other thing you have to do after you figure out your combat modifiers, including the cav superiority, and you can make the choice of whether you're taking the column shift, is you calculate out the army rerolls. And the way those are calculated out, each leader gives a certain, at the army level, gives a certain number of rerolls. You're also going to be calculating out modifiers based on the tactical values of the leaders as well, which I don't see listed anywhere here clearly, but it's one of the things that you add up. And those will be die roll modifiers. You sum the two players' reroll numbers, and if the other player has negative values on their army leaders, those I believe add to the person. I'm trying to remember. See, now I read this long enough ago, just when I started reading the rules to you, is about, it maybe been a day or two off, but I seem to remember there was something funky about this that's a little different. Army reroll. Okay, so what do they say? If the army reroll value is positive, that player has the option of rerolling. Okay, so yeah. So, and here's where it's different because you have multiple leaders. You sum all the army leaders that you have reroll values. If you get a positive result, that's how many rerolls you're going to get. If you get a negative result out of that sum, that's how many rerolls you give to your enemy. And then you get to alternate on choosing whether or not to reroll either player's attack dice. When you actually make the roll on the chart, I've already kind of explained this, but just as a reminder, you roll on here, you add any modifiers, you've applied your column shifts or whatever, and now you've come up with a result that you've done to the enemy, which is going to be one of these boxes. You look at the size of your force in the center, whether you're the, gotta look carefully, whether you're the attack, so the attacker is going to do things to the defender on the right column. So you'll see if the odds are very good, he does a lot of damage. While the defender is going to do things to the attacker, but look up on the left side column. And it all makes sense when you're doing it, especially if you're used to the Victory Games game. It's the same format there. You're going to get results. There'll be a number of different things. I don't know what the hell an M is. It sounds like a morale check. And oh no, that's the medium size. So yeah, so you do it based on the size of the attacking unit. And if it's like 1 to 3 strength points, it's a small force. Up to 7, I think it's medium, and above 7, it's large. I may have the numbers wrong. Those will become second nature though. So the actual results are either nothing, a dash, a number, which is a number of strength points lost, or D in a number, which is a demoralization effect and a numbers lost. Now remember, if you're fighting a combat and you don't have combat supply, you're going to take a demoralization in the combat. There may be other things. The artillery can give you demoralization. So you can get multiple layers of demoralization. You have to track all of those. All right, there's some special penalties that are baked into all of this, and unfortunately we talk about all this stuff before we get where we are. German infantry. As long as they have an infantry assault penalty, the French get a +2 die roll modifier to all combats in which the Prussians have any infantry SPs in, of either type. There's going to be a track here that each time you have a significant combat, you get a chance. You move forward a space and you roll dice and see whether or not you eliminate that penalty. The French have something similar. If we've got the artillery here, the French have a short fuse. Well, no. They're using a timing fuse, and I don't know where that's spelled out, but basically they get a penalty on their artillery fire, and likewise they have a table which each significant combat they get to roll against, and eventually they get to get rid of that and use a percussion cap. Okay. We've kind of talked about demoralized at the beginning, but there is, I'm sorry, leader values at the beginning, but there is an effect for demoralized leaders. If they have a positive value, it's halved for any armies that are demoralized, or any forces that are demoralized. Okay, another modifier is what kind of troops you got with you. If you got any of those francs-tireurs, you get a penalty of 1 on you. If it's all you got a penalty of 2 against your die roll. They're not big units designed to fight in field battles, and they can screw up your entire force if you've got them with you. So you probably want to withdraw with them, since they can just do that. Okay, the Prussians also get a DRM bonus if the French force contains at least 1 franc-tireur. Reserve infantry, if you have Landwehr or mobilized units, if it's all you have, you get a -2 to your die roll. If you have 1 or more of them and 1 or more other thing, you get a -1. If you have franc-tireur and reserve infantry, you get the -2 there that you would for only the cav superiority we talked about. CRT effects we kind of talked about. Now you have to check for whether you have a leader casualty. Okay. If at least 1 non-replacement leader is present in the combat, the attacker rolls a couple of dice and looks at the possibility of leader casualty table. Great. So this actually reduces the total number of die rolls that the old victory game system had, and probably reduces the amount of casualties there are. But unfortunately we have to look for this. So depending on the size of the force gives you die rolls. For some reason, small forces are unlikely to cause leader casualties. I can see that sort of, but not sort of, because, well, I don't know. Anyway. Oh, you check for each leader. Okay, never mind. Okay. Beginning with your division and working your way up. So it is even more annoying because you have to check that chart as well. Maybe that chart's not particularly bad. Nah, it doesn't look particularly bad. It's not by type though. Wait a minute. If leader casualty is indicated, each player... No. Yeah. You roll on this. This may give you a leader casualty. If you get a leader casualty, you roll for each on the leader casualty table. Now, why the fuck is this worded the way it is? Okay. If you get a leader casualty, I guess, you go to the leader casualty selection roll, and you roll for each of your leaders, working your way up in order, and you see whether or not they die. Now, how many leader casualties can you get? Well, it's based on your losses. If you take a 0 or 1 loss on the CRT, you can only suffer 1 leader casualty. Otherwise, it's up to the number of strength points you lose. So, there's a couple of things in play here. First of all, you roll first for your lower ranked leaders. Secondly, the chances of your higher ranked leaders getting hurt is lower, but you may reach your limit of leaders that you could lose. Then if you get a leader loss, you roll another die and see where the bullet entered his body and how much blood you see what the result is. And a wounded result kind of keeps him on the board. Depends on the leader type, but it can keep him on the board if he's, I think, Army or Corps, certainly Army commander. Army or Corps commander, though, I think. And he brings a replacement leader in, and he's recovering with the Army. Any of the others incapacitate and puts him on the turn record track. I don't remember, a D6 plus 1 turns, which is the base injury type, the only injury type in the Victory Games game. And finally killed, he's removed from the game. And then you have to deal with your command problems based on that. Okay, I need to swap batteries. and then we'll get to the impact on battle. And yeah, this is turning out to be a meaty video too. I had worries that this one would only be 10 minutes, you know. Bit of rationalization. Cut the good part of the intro. Made that intro A. And once I get to the rules, that's intro B, where I'm actually digging through them. I give a pretty good summation, I think, in intro A, so. Okay. Battle impact. So what happens when a battle's resolved? After it's been resolved, you're going to roll some dice on the battle impact table, and there's a whole pile of modifiers here. And it's kind of weird. Let's see if we can find this table. Here it is. Okay. So there's separate tables for the attacker and defender. I can close the door, unfortunately. Separate tables for the attacker and defender, and you're going to get modifiers. So one of your army rank leaders will get his reroll value, and one of the corps leaders gets their reroll value if anyone survived the combat. If you have no corps leaders but you have division leaders and non-army attached forces, you're able to use a division leader instead of a corps leader rating. And you'll take these results on the table. Negatives obviously get you closer to the defender failure chart. You get other modifiers. The terrain in the defender's hex is a modifier to both sides' die roll. It looks to me like the worse the terrain, the worse it is for both sides, basically. The reserve infantry modifier, if you're using reserve infantry, you get a penalty. If you're using frontiers, you get a penalty. If you're being, so this is the only place where this shows up, but if you're being attacked from more than one hex side, the attacker gets a positive DRM. Well, I wonder where that is. It says CPAC. I don't see it here. I try to read some of these. Here they are. Ah, okay. You know, once you get to the actual table, it's fine, but it's a pain in the ass trying to read this weird red blurry script. So this sums it all up. And the concentric attack, well, maybe it doesn't. Okay, it's the number of forces, which is unfortunately, I think, not written here and not written here. Eh? Not exactly. Like, there's nowhere in rules, it's only in the example. I hate when they do that because my belief is skim the examples at best, unless you don't get something well. All right. Artillery modifiers. That's not going to tell me. If the other player got an... okay, so whatever DRM you got for the artillery fire will be a negative... No, it'll be a -1 to your battle impact roll. Minus another 1 for each infantry, for each strength point you lost due to artillery. Okay, and you can get a number of results here, which might be retreating additional hexes, which gives you an option to retreat further. The attacker can get one where he... or, well, not the attacker, the winner can get one where he gets a pursuit result, which allows him to advance. It doesn't have to be on the path of the attacker. You might lose your demoralizations, which is kind of nice. You might be able to force additional rounds of combat. Now, forcing additional rounds of combat is kind of interesting. The opposing player gets an immediate option to declare a cavalry death ride, which sounds as bad for the cav as it really is, if they have any cav SPs available. If the defender attempting to force the additional round of combat, the attacker still rolls the battle impact result. Okay. If the attacker avoided using a cav death ride, they can't force another round of combat. If you get a battle failure, then you roll again on this further chart, which is going to have more extreme results like panic, which causes other units to collapse near you. I see suicidal attack, you know, stuff like that. And if you're familiar with things like Embrace an Angry Wind, the game on the Civil War that covers what is that? The Spring Hill campaign. You can see what kind of crap's going on, and it's kind of neat to have that additional flavor built into it. Again, I don't know whether all this extra burden is going to make this too cumbersome or make it just more fun. You know, that's what play is going to determine. It's going to be hardest on the first play. So if I have fun in the first play, it probably will hold up pretty well for me at least. Exploits and reinforcements. You select which formation moves. Yeah, so these are kind of spelled out here. So like exploit, the attacker can immediately move any one friendly formation within 3 hexes of the combat hex, a hex in any direction. Reinforcements, the defender gets to move a formation closer, and just all kind of stuff like that. All right. Removal of formations. Okay, anything that doesn't have strength points will be eliminated here, except if an army is out of strength points and it's got subordinate units that still have strength points, it can suck one of them in. Demoralization. Excuse me. When you take a result for demoralization, or if you take a combat when you're not in combat supply, you'll get demoralization markers. You can also get them from combat. Battle impact can remove all demoralizations. We still haven't gotten to what victory is going to be here, but anyway. You get chits on them. Basically, any units that stack with demoralized units are demoralized as well. You can get multiple demoralization levels during a combat. That's going to help for determining the victor. The effect of demoralized, you can't enter an enemy unit's hex. You can't, unless you can overrun, but you're allowed to defend. If you begin combat demoralized, it's a column shift. It reduces the leadership effects that are positive. Movement and reaction is penalized in those rules. You probably saw those. I don't remember them. And otherwise, demoralized units pretty much stand the same. Oh, if they're undemoralized, well, if they're demoralized during the rally phase, they may suffer SP losses. This is one I want to look at because this is kind of fun. This is differently worded from Civil War, but where it says it here, it sounds exactly the same. So if demoralized units are in movement phase, you can activate those units, and this costs the same as movement activation, and remove the demoralization. In the rally phase, all demoralized units in the hex lose 1 SP and recover. The SP loss is chosen by the controlling player. Now, this is only if you're in movement supply. I don't know if this is an intentional change or not, or if it's something that got introduced. I may end up playing it both ways, depending on, you know, whether or not that's taking precedence in my mind, or I look up this rule and forget that I'm not sure that I really accept how the rule's written. Because the fact that demoralized units that are in movement supply recover in one of these ways, this doesn't specify, this seems to surround in the rally phase, in the sense that you don't suffer the loss in the rally phase. Now, maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe it's worded just as stupidly in the OVG game. I doubt that. They had some very good rules editors. The only game that I can think of that's really kind of got painful issues is Pax Britannica. And those issues have less to do with the wording of the rule as to so much as I don't know. I almost feel like there were some real big assumptions made as to how the game would play out as worded, you know. Anyway. Combat victory. So you have to decide who won the battle. That decides who leaves. If one side's eliminated, yeah, they didn't win. If one side used a Cav Death Ride, the other side won. if neither side took any SP losses, and you've just got this chart going down, and it ends up following pretty reasonably. So, you know, if one side's demoralized, they lose, etc. And it's just following the ordering of it. Okay. And then whoever lost is going to be forced to retreat, and they have to move to an adjacent hex unless they have a bonus that allows, or penalty perhaps, that allows them to retreat further. Attacker must retreat. Okay, so this is an option forcing the attacker back into the exact hexes that they attacked from. Usually the options in this game feel like they're intended to capture a greater reality. This one, I'm left not sure, and I wish there was a designer's note of the type that explained the reason. This is the problem with the designer's notes in this game. Almost all of them are clarifications rather than anything else. And what I want is, in a designer's note, if you label something designer's note, I want to understand, why is this rule here? Okay, maybe it's towards the back. It's not. Okay. You can lose strength points for retreats if you go through an enemy zone of information, or whatever you want to call it. Zeta Ost Idkol. I mean, you know, you give me acronyms, I make shit up, right? If you can't retreat, you're reduced to 0. You're eliminated. If the only valid retreat is in an in-hex fortress, the formation would be treated as eliminated with no valid retreat path. What? Oh. Okay, if the formation is reduced to 0 strength points, it looks like it's eliminated anyway. I don't understand what the wording here is supposed to mean. There's a lot of that in this. Maybe we'll make something up that tries to apply to it. I mean, for formations reduced to 0 SPs, if the only valid retreat location is an in-hex fortress, the formation and any leaders would be treated. Okay, so I assume this is, again, contained by, hey, if you don't have a valid retreat. So this is a possibility that if there's only a fortress nearby and you have a 0 strength, you're not able to get back to the fortress for some reason. I'm not quite sure what the reasoning is behind that, but because normally you could retreat into the fortresses. So the French, anything they lose cannot be rebuilt, and they're permanently eliminated. Prussians are allowed to be rebuilt. Now, this is important because there's a lot of French corps for a reason. They've got a limit to how many they can have on the board, but they can lose some. Eliminated Prussian cav and SPs are returned immediately available. The armies have a delay in corps. Each leader has to make a roll to see if they escape capture. I assume this is on any retreat. If you roll a 4 or higher, the leader is permanently eliminated from the game. And that's on 2 dice. I guess that's under elimination. Now what's not clear is that if, you know, your core is eliminated, or is that only if you're faced with this? It's not really clear. Like, it's additional losses during a retreat, right? And then inability to retreat. We're in retreats and advances. No, honestly, I think no matter what, if you have to retreat, it looks like the way this is worded and ordered, what are we under here? Inability to retreat. Okay, yeah. So if you are unable to retreat, these policies take place on the forces. Otherwise, you would get those back, I guess. And your leaders may be permanently eliminated. Okay, I read that wrong. I thought the French lost their armies no matter what. If combat hex is vacant, the victor remains in the hex unless they get the advance after combat from the chart. And then they can move. And they're still affected, like they can't, they've got limitations. They can't enter a prohibited hex or but I don't think they can be, this isn't normal movement, so they can't be intercepted. They can't have a, they're not affected by zones of influence in checks. Okay. End of combat status checks. This is when you check the two penalties against the countries, the views and the assaults. If the French Empire has not fallen, any in-command French army not involved in the combat, any in-command French army leader not involved in the combat must go through the French Imperial Command replacement process. Wow, I didn't realize that. Okay, so only the ones who were not in the combat check for this. Wow, that is not what I would have assumed. Must have read this section while I was tired. That is weird. Okay, well, okay. So, you know, if your commander was not involved in the combat, he might get replaced. If a corps attached to that army was involved in... Oh, there's the catch. If a corps attached to the army was involved in the combat and became demoralized, or the French served, and the other is in command French army combat leader involved in combat, it has to check. So basically, if anything in your army gets screwed up, you're going to have possible checks. The Prussians, if they take too many losses, they get a subject to recall, i.e. compared to the opponent marker, which now allows you to recall them. Corps leaders that survive the combat and have an associated army leader get that army leader as a reinforcement in the next game turn. And I gotta tell you, I don't know what is going on here. Any in-command French army not involved in that? You see, it's this bolding, I think, but no, it's just this whole structure of the sentence is designed to make you misread it, you know? Okay. If the French force is containing Napoleon III and it is not the victor of the combat, there's a chance the French Empire falls. French Empire falling is not necessarily a bad thing for the French player. It has to happen at some point, but you take a big victory, well, one would assume, but you take a big victory point penalty for it, so we'll see. If the victor is the moving side, now this is very different from the victory games. They get to keep going if they had any movement points left. And this could be a whole coordinated, you know, action with several units moving, and now more movement gets to continue after the combat's been resolved. So that's all weird. The reactors cannot continue moving even if, like, they only used 1 out of 2 hexes. We got to swap batteries here. Less than 10 pages left. And it's funny because when I get to this point in the rules, I'm usually so fatigued. Not right now, not reading them to you necessarily, but when I'm reading them to myself, I'm usually so fatigued with the game and at this level of reading the rules that I often skip this stuff, and it's often special purpose type stuff. So that's why my discussions of the rules start fuzzing as I go later and later. Not only am I tired from reading them, and here it's over several days, but I'm also tired when I read them the first time. So I never really get a good feel for the later parts of the rules once you get to a big game. Okay. So Cav units are 1 or 2 strength points. Here we have some design notes. Okay, so this looks like closer to what I'd expect in design notes, except it doesn't really link into the specifics of the rules, but that's okay. It's giving me some, it's more of a just purely historical note rather than what I'd call a design note, but okay. Design notes may just be anything the designer wanted to add that belongs in a gray box, I don't know. Cav division creation, we already went through. Their activations, they can be activated alone or with other units. In combat, they don't directly participate in combat. Their factors don't go into the odds calculations. Now, I know I told you this before. I didn't see it in that section, but it may be there. Before combat resolution, you get to choose your superiority, etc. If you get a reaction by a Cav unit, it can choose If a hex triggering a reaction attempt is within a ZOI, and this is different from what I thought, from a friendly cav division, and the same cav division is within the ZOI of the unit attempting reaction, the reaction attempt gets a +1 die roll. We knew about that. We saw that before. During battle impact, you can do an additional round of combat. You lose 1 CSP from 1 cavalry strength point, not just combat strength point, right? Give me acronyms and I'll probably make errors because I'm making things up. Allow their units to retreat. Okay, so you're only losing 1 cav point. Movement interdiction, like I said, you can stick around on a reaction, and this will cause an extra movement point to the enemy. However, you're still there now, and you're going to get attacked. You're not allowed to withdraw after this, which kind of sucks. And you have to roll on the cav movement interdiction table. Yeah, I didn't know that. I thought you just caused a casualty. Where is this? Look through the blurry tables to see what we can fucking find, huh? Yeah. I mean, I'm a fan of player aids, but not when they're taken to extremes. Alright. Here's special reactions. Maybe this is it. It says cav movement interdiction. That's not what the table's labeled, though. So you roll some dice, and do you have any modifiers? I don't know. There's, you know, you'd have to look all around these things and try to read these funny red print that's all blurry. But I think you just roll straight up. Maybe it says here. There's apply the reaction effect modifiers from the TEC. So it's like a regular reaction check. And I guess you need a 3 or a 4 to get success. So if we look at the reaction modifiers, if we can find those, well, they're just all positive, so you're screwed. Wow, you have just about no chance of doing this. Seriously? Let's see. Each cav division attempting to cause the movement point penalty is designated, then roll on the following table. Yeah. Yeah, you'd better really want to take a movement point away to try that shit. Okay. Normally, though, you can just refuse combat if you have a valid movement path out of there. And you just push out, otherwise you can't do it. Cav divisions in control. They can control hexes, but not... They can't convert rail hexes, and they can't control a fortress. And they can't besiege a fortress and all kind of stuff. No, they can control, they can't besiege. I don't know. Artillery, anything exciting about artillery here? Not really, except we finally get the, you know, it's weird, the assault is put in one page, but the fuse is not. And the fuse is simply, it's simply a penalty on the chart, and this is no bigger than the German assault thing. It's just in a different place for no real good reason. When the Empire falls, this moves the fuse thing 1 space forward, but no die roll for it. And combat is just the artillery fire table. Okay, well, we're in no real hurry to finish these rolls because I'm still loading up the previous. So this is a good point to break.